Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
And welcome to another episode. I was going to say the 13th episode, but it's not. It's chapter 13, and we're on part 3, and we have the full team. So welcome, everybody. And we're going to be starting this week's episode from the line, "I was not sure of the way," and then we're going all the way down until just a crusher. So are we feeling ready? Ready to go? But before we do it, it would be a good idea to just remind ourselves what happened last week. So Mike, you want to tell us?
So the chapter is called The Sleepless Saint, and we're learning more and more about him. So apparently his name is Ram Gopal Muzumdar, and Guruji heard about him in the last part from his Sanskrit teacher. And he went out to seek him. He lives in a small town near Kolkata. And so on the way, he went to the famous Tarakeshwar shrine. And we have to remember he did not bow to the linga that was there and continued on. And now we'll see how this impacts this episode here.
Yes, thank you. And we start off by Makunda not being sure of the way. He doesn't know which way to go. And he appeals to a passerby who then sinks into this long cogitation. That really made me chuckle when I read that. But it's curious here because, you know, in so many of the other chapters, Mukunda goes straight to Divine Mother for answers. But here he goes straight to the stranger. And he asks him obviously for the directions, and after a long while he says, you know, when you come to a crossroad, turn right and keep going. Oh, Priyank, you're on mute.
Maybe he exhausted the Divine Mother, please, because in this case, he was actually sent in the wrong direction, and he was sent on this journey because of his not bowing, as we know later on. So maybe like Divine Mother wasn't listening in this occasion, hence had to turn to poor old humanity.
Yes, could well be, and unfortunately so that he did, because he does get lost, which we'll find out in a minute. So he follows the directions and he goes alongside a canal, and he's walking, and then darkness falls, and he's on the outskirts of this village, like a jungle village. And it's a really beautiful line here. It's quite poetic. He says, the outskirts of the jungle village were alive with winking fireflies and the howls of nearby jackals.
Yeah, I took the line just before that as a bit of a hint. Now, I may be reading into it, I don't know, but as we're going line by line, I thought the word obeying was interesting, obeying the directions. So the directions, and, you know, the convocation was, you know, somebody thinking deeply about something, which, I don't know, is it another hint? You know, we're going to see this unravel as we go along in this part, you know, how things go for Mukunda in this trip. And I think these little words may be hints that this is Guruji not, you know, going in line with his intuition. You know, he's obeying something else. He's not going along with what he should be going along with. He's going along this long winding path, as we're going to see. So yeah, it's curious when I look at this now. Maybe these words are sort of dropped in to provide hints.
The fact that he left his Guru Sri Yukteswar, I mean, this must have been against his intuition as well in some form, right? So I feel like, I don't want to say he went rogue, but he's definitely on his own little mission here. And maybe he doesn't have his usual kind of peaceful feeling inside that usually helps him to see clearly what he needs to do next.
And here clearly, because he was getting hounded by howls of nearby jackals. Sounds romantic, but it's quite scary thing. I was just in India in January, and we had to go down. There was like some crazy road traffic or something, and we had to take a shortcut around some other way, which was through some very dark passages and like really sparsely populated houses and very lonely streets. Anyway, there's no lampposts, but there were crazy amounts of dogs. Probably not jackals, but definitely dogs. And I don't really get scared of dogs. Not even in India. I just kind of walk through them. But my wife gets really, really scared. But then they kind of sense fear, so then they always follow her around. And I kept telling her to like walk my side, not the dog side. But it was, and then we had to turn back. But it was quite a scary episode because we were getting surrounded by a lot of dogs.
Yeah, for sure. That would be quite frightening. No, in Brazil, the packs of wild dogs as well. So I empathize with your dear wife, myself, Frank. Yeah, it's a bit of a haunting kind of few sentences or chunk this that you've got this person who's deep in thought. They give this utterance or decision in special inspiration or authority is the definition of the word oracular. How do you pronounce that, Lauren?
Oracularly.
Thank you.
Perhaps.
Yes, indeed.
Not sure.
Yeah.
I said it with confidence. That's something.
Matters, yeah. This is painting a picture, isn't it? That he's kind of been led down this long winding path into the woods, and it is, getting darker and darker. And so his better intuitions, he's betraying his conscience as it smote him in the previous part that we read. And this is the picture that I think he's painting for us here, that he's fallen into some darker path.
And it's kind of a bit of a comment on, if you don't follow the wise words of your guru, if you don't follow what your guru says, you will end up lost and in the dark and trying to find your way on your own, which, as we know, you can't find God without our guru, right?
I think in a devotee's life, sometimes we forget how lucky we are to have a guru and his guidance. And then I can't even imagine how life would be without a guru. I would be so lost. So I think Guruji here is just going out on a little excursion, I guess, but it's still a reminder that the wisdom of the guru is so important.
Yeah, and it's scary when you are on your own and you're getting lost. That that's a good word that you said there, Priyank, about it must be quite scary being out there for Mukunda. He's on his own. He's quite young-ish. It's getting dark, and he's even saying that the moonlight was too faint to be helpful. And then he just is stumbling on for 2 hours, which is a very long time. And it did make me think, it's quite a long time to be lost for. And I wonder if he ever wondered, oh, is this actually the way? I'm not sure. But perhaps there was no one, to ask on the way.
And he doesn't really give us that insight here, at least. He doesn't say, myself. He doesn't really go into that, does he? And I presumed just myself that here's somebody of, he's got confidence, or he's got this real determination, this steely determination that he's going to continue regardless. And it's probably why he was so strongly drawn away from his guru at the time, which, going back a few episodes prior, we were all very surprised that he was able to do that given the circumstance. So he's obviously got this steely determination and he's kind of pushing on. So that was why I sort of surmised that he didn't say that he questioned himself at this point.
Yeah. So yeah, he carries on, and then we have a slight turn of events, because Makunda, being lost, becomes not so lost anymore, and we have this welcome sound or clang of a cowbell. Now that's heard, and he's shouting, and eventually he says he brought a peasant to my side.
There's probably a million cows roaming the streets of India, and in from rural to city life, they're just given a completely free reign. But if they've got a bell, then they probably belong to a specific person, and they go back to wherever they were released from, because they probably just send them out to go graze themselves and then come back. But then there's pretty, I don't know, at least half of the cows are just they're probably let go by their owners. I don't know if like they stop lactating, or they can no longer afford to keep them, or whatever reason. They just let them roam. And of course, cows aren't they're treated quite with a lot of respect in India. So they're fed quite well by locals, and yeah, they're pretty well treated actually. So you'll see lots of them if you go into India. So you're probably happy to see one or hear one.
In Austria too, in a different way. Like in Austria in the summer, everyone goes hiking in the mountains, and then half of those mountains will be full of cows, because they go up there to eat all the herbs and stuff like that, and they all have bells as well. So whenever you go hiking and you hear the bells, you know already, there's cows over there.
Civilization.
So not really civilization. There are cows there. They belong to someone. Doesn't mean anyone is there. They usually have their farms in the valley, and then in the summer they bring the cows up and leave them there for a few days or weeks and come back down.
And Guruji doesn't actually say here if the cow came with the man, or if it was just the man. I'm sure it's a very, it's not a worthy detail for the book, but still. So then there's a conversation between Mukunda and the peasant, as he calls him, and he explains, I'm looking for Ram Gopal Babu, and the man is very suspicious, and in a very surly tone, says that no such man lives in the village.
And the reason he would be suspicious is because police often employ very dubious and cunning means to capture criminals. So they do things like this, just act innocent and try and gather information, see if all these kind of things. Because so in this poor person's mind, he could think a police officer is looking for a criminal that's named Ram Gopal Babu, and then if he just tells him, "Oh yeah, I know him. He's my best mate. He lives down here," then he's now an accomplice. So this is why he's probably a bit scared, because of the cunning ways of the officers in India, and to this day, actually.
I was wondering what he meant by his politically troubled mind. Do you think is that what he means? So is it not really about political opinion or anything? It's more about the local, like the way he navigates the local authorities, kind of. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I reckon too, because he goes on to say, you're probably a lying detective. So yeah, and then as Mike was saying, Guruji's hoping to allay any suspicion in his politically troubled mind, and says that I touchingly explained my predicament. And then we have a very interesting turn, because in the next sentence it says, he took me to his home and offered a hospitable welcome. And it's just so lovely, isn't it? It just goes from one thing to the other. Yeah, Mike.
But I think this shows also the Indian culture a bit. They're very hospitable. And at the moment when he felt this person is not a threat, then suddenly his humanity came out and was like, it's night. He has nowhere to go, so I'll give him food and shelter.
Irish hospitality is quite similar, actually, I must say, having recently gone there. Probably I had the best hospitality in Ireland compared to all the other places around the world that I've been to, other than India, of course.
Wow. I have to say that this part of the chapter is really reminding me of my trip to America. And I have to say this, a similar sort of hospitality I found in America, in both Los Angeles and Encinitas, not just from devotees, but also from seeming strangers who, came to my aid many times with such a, fullness of heart. And yeah, it reminds me of that in a way. You're in trouble and there someone is and they're ready to help you. And it really reminded me, and this does remind me too, of God really helps us through people. And here he's helping little Makunda, even though he's strayed away from his guru's wishes. Yeah, Priyank.
Yeah, it's the whole concept of hospitality is obviously deeply spiritually significant, isn't it? I mean, just reading the Bible, there's that famous line, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. And I was sick and you looked after me." So there's all these. I mean, you could really make all of those kind of an inspiration to be more and more hospitable in your life. And it's kind of like charity doesn't just mean giving away your wealth, does it? It also means doing things that maybe sometimes cause you an inconvenience about, so in this example, being hospitable or sharing your dinner, of which you may not have much of anyway.
Yeah.
I thought I think I shared this story before maybe, but that it reminds me of a story of a woman that had a near-death experience and had her whole life play in front of her spiritual eye, and that there was like a highlight reel kind of out of it, and one of her biggest highlights was when she was taking care of a person that had no one and was had like a mental disease, and she was taking care of him for many weeks, and that was somehow something that her after death seemed one of the most significant things that she done, not her career, not her anything else, but that part. So I think that also really matters when we are showing hospitality to others.
Yeah, it's a really lovely reminder of that, isn't it? Yeah. And I remember one of the monks in a talk, he said that friendship begins where convenience ends. So, going out of our way to help others, maybe when it's not particularly convenient for us.
Just in the week of convocation, and Sister Ranjana in her talk, she said she is near empty on her fuel when by the time she gets to the top of Mount Washington. And on one occasion she was making Mike's laughing, she was making her way up, and the car stopped like 3/4 of the way up or something, and she obviously stuck, so she pulled over, and then quite quickly afterwards like a man and his daughter or someone came up and said, "Oh, do you need any help?" And she she was embarrassed, but she said, "I ran out of gas." And they said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll go down to the bottom of the hill and we'll bring you back some gas with a gallon." And he comes back and she said, "Okay, thank you so much." She's relieved, and obviously Guru's helped her. And she said, "Let me pay you." And he said, "No, I can't. I wouldn't think of it. You can't pay me." And she was like, "Wow, what an amazing, charity or hospitality." And then she was enjoying this, memory, but she was like, I owe them something, right? But they wouldn't let me pay or whatever. And like a few weeks later, she was coming back up the hill, and someone had pulled over because they'd run out of gas, and she stopped, and it was the same couple, and this time they'd run out of gas, and she was like, "Let me help you." And then she helped, and she went back she went back and filled up. But the funny thing about that story, she said it's happened to this same scenario has happened to her 4 times or something, where she ran out of gas going up the hill. But it's quite sweet how she remembered the hospitality of these devotees. Well, they weren't devotees actually, just strangers.
Yeah. Like I say, that around that area, people are just so lovely. I remember when I was there and it was my first day, and I decided to go and get some food. And I thought I'll walk down. I walked down the hill, and I'll get the food, and then I'll get an Uber back. So I'd gone down. I'd got all my shopping. I'd got bags and bags. So there's no way I could walk. And then I find that my phone doesn't work, and I can't get any signal, and there's no way to call any sort of cab, right? So there I am, sort of trying to enlist the help of some strangers to see if but no one really spoke English, because it's there's a lot of Spanish speakers that way. So I'd asked one person that he couldn't understand English. I asked the next person, he couldn't also speak English, but he tried to give me his phone, but his phone also didn't work, right? So I was standing there with blazing hot sun. I was thinking, God, what am I going to do? Help me, please. And something just said, oh, go in that laundrette, just two shops down, just go in there. I'm like, okay. So I went in, and there was no one behind the desk, but there was this woman who was waiting, and she had her back to me. I thought, yeah, just ask her. So I explained my predicament, and I said, oh, is there any way I could just borrow your phone just to call a cab or something? And she said, oh no, I'll take you home. Where do you need to go? So this lovely lady took me all the way back to where I was staying, and she was just the nicest woman ever. And it just really kind of highlighted the kind of people that live around that way, because they were just so lovely.
Wasn't Sister Ranjana by any chance, was it?
It might have been in disguise.
Did you run out of gas on the way up?
Not quite. That's how I knew it wasn't her. But yeah, similarly here we have a stranger coming to the aid. So Mukunda's gone back to his home, and the stranger, who we don't actually know his name, but explains that how do I pronounce this? Ranbajpur, thank you, is far from here. And then he says, when you got to the crossroads, you should have turned left, not right. And then Guruji remarks that he thought that the earlier informant, he thought sadly, was a definite menace to travelers.
I mean, I would have been a bit slightly aggravated at this point. I would have been like, why, if somebody doesn't know the way, or why would you send someone the wrong way on purpose? This is just very unfortunate. I would this is time to meditate now. Time to meditate and burn some karma and get in a good mood again.
Mike, he's just playing the role that God has asked him to play, because Mukunda was meant to suffer, as we find out in this. This direction giver, if you could call him that, he's really just a tool of the divine, isn't he?
Yeah.
Divine tool, yeah.
Very good, Mike. But luckily for Makunda, he's it's not all bad, because he's got somewhere to stay, and he has a very nice meal of coarse rice, lentil dal, and the curry of potatoes with raw bananas. So it sounds very, very delicious.
How delicious does this sound? I mean, I've just already had dinner, but if this was in front of me, I would dare say I'd indulge again, because it just sounds. And you could, the way he's describing this and the second meal in this chapter, which is not dissimilar from this meal, it just makes it sound so good, right? And especially after a long journey, food sometimes is even better, isn't it?
Yeah. And you know, it's not just food, is it? It's a place to stay, and it's in a small hut which adjoins the courtyard. And you know, he's saying that in the distance he can hear singing with a very loud accompaniment of mridangos and cymbals, and they're obviously having some sort of kirtan. And he said that sleep was inconsiderable that night. I prayed deeply to be directed to the secluded yogi Ram Gopal. So here he's decided to, instead of, you know, going to sleep, he's probably very tired after that very long journey, right? But he's saying, actually, no, I'm gonna commit my efforts to God and prayer, seeking the divine aid.
I like that he's asked God for help directly about what he wants. And we know that when you pray and you affirm and you repeat the prayer and you repeat the affirmation until it enters your subconscious and then superconscious, and then that's obviously knocks on the door of God's heart, and then he sometimes reciprocates the desire. So, you know, he's attracting the solution to him by praying for it and affirming it and asking for it with deep devotion and prayer.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for picking that up, Priyank. Yeah, it's a good lesson for us, isn't it?
Rather than just thinking God knows
yeah,
God knows what I want, but you got to really attract it to yourself.
Yeah, because it can be easy, can't it, to get into that mindset of, oh yeah, well, I won't ask because he knows. But yeah, we should use our will and devotion.
I'm only just recently making a change on that respect, to be honest. Most of my life as a devotee, I've sort of been in this category of God knows what I want. My prayer, most of my prayers are just silence because God knows. But recently I've started using metaphysical meditations and prayers and affirmations, just as Mukunda is doing here.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that book that you just mentioned is amazing. I think the other point you made, I'm always confused about that, how specific our prayer should be, because sometimes it says there's this one. It's also in the same book where it says when you pray for something, you pray for it, but then it shows more faith when you say, God, you know my every wish, sustain me according to thy will. Right? So it kind of contradicts itself a little bit. And I'm sometimes, I think it really depends on the situation, but I think there's some merit in both, for both things. Or maybe you should do both prayers.
Chris, you go first.
I'm actually kind of with you, Mike, because my initial thought I was thinking, how can I phrase this to throw it into the conversation without putting the cat amongst the pigeons? But you know, with Makunda here, I guess he is on the right path, you know, and we're here to learn through his example and through his life, and that's why he's put all of this in the book for us to read. You know, this is all has purpose to it, but we know that in theory, he kind of made a mistake. You know, going away from his master, even though his master essentially said, "Look, stay here with me, and don't go to the mountains." But yet here he is meditating, praying deeply. I thought to myself, well, maybe he might realize in this moment, oh man, I've made a mistake. That was so close. I might just continue. So to Mike's point, like you might be praying for quote unquote the wrong thing, but in essence, it'll still get you to ultimately where you want to be. You know, it is a big, you know, big question mark to my mind, but you know, hopefully we're always guided by Guruji's hands, and we're on the path that we need to be on rather than the one that we think we should be on. But, yeah.
Well, let me try and address those points, Mike and Chris, because through the help of Sister Bhagavati, was it Lauren? Because we pretty much went through this exact same conversation.
Anjali.
but it was both of them. But she
Yeah.
said this bit, and then Sister Anjali said the second bit that I'm going to say. So I asked pretty much this question, but in a different way. So I asked in the young adults meeting we had satsang with the two sisters that were here for a convocation. So you, Chris, and Mike, you're very much still attuned with the young adults at the London Centre because you're going through the same kind of thing that we went through. So anyways, I asked both sisters, I said, is it right to use one of Guruji's prayers for health, if we're suffering from lack of health or well-being, if we're suffering from lack of well-being, but at the same time there's a kind of a contradictory stance in the sense that when you hear Sister Gyanamata's prayer, which is Lord, change no circumstance in my life, change me, here you're saying, and I think this is one of the most powerful prayers in our teachings, this Sister Gyanamata's prayer. And then there's all these, there's countless prayers for health, and we kind of do it, eternal youth of body and mind, abide in me forever and forever. We do it in energization every day, right before we pray, before we do energization. And Sister Bhagavati started, and she said, when we pray for perfect health, and we don't have it, then we're creating a desire that has to be fulfilled, and that may mean that we need to take rebirth to fulfill that desire. So he says, essentially, be careful what you pray for. And she gave this example of how we were created perfect. Humans were created perfect, and we were meant to return back to God's kingdom quickly. But Maya came and gave us, a little bit of sorrow and pain, and we were distracted, and we wanted health from those things. And then the rounds of incarnations kind of started. And she kind of said we shouldn't fear these things, because fear becomes like a magnet as well. That which you're fearing, if you're dwelling on it, is kind of, you attract it to yourself. So the only thing we should fear is fear itself. So don't be afraid, essentially. Just be afraid of being afraid, and have faith instead. And Guruji, she said, if he was here, he would say, trust me, and you would trust him, right? And then Sister Anjali then commented on this and said, there's nothing wrong with praying for perfect health, as long as you add, but you know best. And that speaks to a little bit about what Mike said about adding that aspect of God in the end, letting God decide what is best for you in that scenario. And they both said that they quoted, a juicy illness reduces the grip of the ego, and as you surrender to the pain, the soul comes to the fore, and the ego kind of goes further and further back. So there's a lot of goodness that happens when we essentially, if we allow ourselves to suffer without being overly impacted by it. Obviously quite a hard thing to do, but she said look at the bigger picture, and using prayers like thy will be done and not mine.
Very nice.
You took lots of good notes there, Priyank. You really got everything.
You saw me taking notes that day.
Oh yeah, Priyank, you're always there with the notebook and the pen.
No.
It's great.
Thanks for that. Very good to know.
Yeah, and really useful. It's like good action points, isn't it? But yeah, back to the chapter. So Makunda begins his journey now at the break of dawn. First streaks of dawn, he says. As soon as it penetrated the hut, he set out, and he crossed rough paddy fields, and he's trudging over sickled stumps of prickly plants and around mounds of dried clay. He really gives a really vivid image with his description here. And then he said that occasionally he'd meet a peasant who would inform him that, you know, it was only a crusher away, which means 2 miles. And then he says, in 6 hours, the sun traveled victoriously from horizon to meridian, but I began to feel that I would be ever distant from Ranbachapa by 1 crusher.
This only a crusher is I can vouch for this kind of mentality amongst Indians. Often they don't. This doesn't specify that how far it is. Essentially, they're just saying it's in that kind of direction. It's not far, not far. You know, that's a very subjective thing to say. And I've actually been in this position a few times actually, because I'm a big walker, and a lot of people in India aren't necessarily walkers, especially in today's age. Like when I was there as a student, and I used to walk like 3 or 4 miles, for example, over an hour. And I used to tell the local, my friends there, I walked, and they'd look at me like I was insane, because it not only like don't they walk because of the heat and things like that, because the footpaths and going through traffic and cows and all this kind of, it makes it not really a fun walk. But we, being used to these kind of walks, we tend to do that in the UK, especially for long walks. But yeah, so getting directions, I've often gone through this exactly the same thing. Someone saying it's over there, and you ask how far, not far, how long will it take? 10 minutes. 10 minutes could mean 60 minutes or 5 minutes. Just, it's completely arbitrary.
It's a bit like this hiker's mentality, right? Like, you've already gone to the destination and you're on your way back, and then you meet people on the way down. And because you've already done it, you go like, it's easy. I've just been there 10 minutes. You're close. But it has nothing to do with reality. But it's just because you've done it already, you don't feel like it's very difficult to do anymore. You climbed that mountain already.
And this is a long 10 minutes from Makunda, isn't it? Because it's actually 6 hours. Imagine walking for 6 hours in the heat.
And he had this little hut that you were saying, mentioned. Don't assume that it was a comfortable night's sleep. that little hut was probably like a mud floor, stacks of hay adjacent to him, probably mice running around. So it wouldn't have been like a lovely bed and blankets, air conditioning, no such thing. It wouldn't have had a fan.
Perhaps that's why he chose not to sleep that night and pray instead.
And endless paddy fields means no trees with any shade. And I'm guessing no little stores where he could have bought some water or some food. So he might not have had any food since breakfast. And then the Indian heat is terrible. So this must have been a real fight against your own body.
Yeah, and he said it was at mid-afternoon, his world was an endless paddy field, and that the heat was bringing him to near collapse. So he was really struggling. And then he sees a man approaching him at a very leisurely pace. And by this point, Mukunda hardly dares to utter his usual question, because he doesn't want to hear that monotonous answer of, "It's just a crusher." Yeah, Mike.
Who might this man be? We'll see next time.
We will find out.
You become so good at the cliffhanger.
Dun, dun, dun. And we will find out next episode, because that is the end of this episode. So we are actually ending on a bit of a cliffhanger today, but I think everyone could probably guess who the stranger might be. Priyank, would you like to tell us what we have to look forward to next time?
But let's really build up the suspense of the cliffhanger. Like,
Oh, go on
let's
then.
add some words here that aren't in the autobiography. All hope had left Mukunda. You know, there was nothing but doubt and fear, and no, just kidding. Of course, none of that. But that man, that approach. So I'm glad to, and sorry to reveal already that it is Ram Gopal Mazumdar. We finally get to meet this
Really?
great
Oh,
saint.
yeah.
Sorry about that. But Mike, I'm sure when most of our listeners, by the time Lauren said that ends the, they sign out at that point because they don't want to reveal the cliffhanger, the outcome of the cliffhanger until the following week.
We should have said spoiler alerts before.
Oh yeah.
So it's a really nice section of the chapter because we experience Ram Gopal Mazumdar's austere ways, both in terms of his relationships with strangers like Mukunda and people that he meets, but also how austere he is for himself. We'll find out later in the chapter. We'll hear his explanations on why Mukunda faced these difficulties, and it gives us a clue as to what we should and shouldn't do, the customs we should pay respect to, etc., and how they might impact us if we don't follow those kind of rules and regulations and advice. And also there's a nice section on how each person is free to have his own preference for the divine reality, Ishta, his own Ishta Deva.
Yeah, wow, I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you all so much for today's episode, and thank you to everyone who tuned in and listened or watched, and we will meet again next week.
Take care.
Yeah.